Welcome to the Multicultural Mindset broadcast. Your host is Dr. Laverne Haynes Collins, a licensed professional counselor, award-winning trainer, and keynote speaker. Dr. Collins is the author of Overlooked: Counselor Insights for the Unspoken Issues in Black American Life. Dr. Collins has also been a featured monthly columnist in the American Counseling Association's Counseling Today magazine with her Honoring Diversity column. Now, here's Dr. Collins.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Multicultural Mindset. Here's where we explore the topics of race, faith, culture, and trauma as related to the mental health of Black Americans. I'm your host, Dr. Laverne Haynes Collins. And once again, I'm so glad that you've joined in for today's podcast. Every Friday, a new episode launches with topics that help counselors to move beyond the mindsets that don't serve our racially identified practice communities the way they deserve to be served. So, I am helping you to throw out anything that you've been taught that will, from a mental health standpoint, blame Black communities for problems that are actually attributable to racism. I'm helping you to throw out anything that suggests that Black people need to be fixed. What needs to be fixed are the prevailing ideologies that we were taught in graduate school. And I want you to throw out anything that points to biased mental health deficits as assumptions about Black people, Black life, or Black culture. Now, instead of that, I want to help you grow into a multicultural mindset that makes your counseling a good fit for more members of Black communities. What we're doing here at the Multicultural Mindset is we are addressing and we are challenging and overturning many of the widely held beliefs about Black people, about what Black people need. And that means intentionally paying attention to what others overlook. We are paying attention to the overlooked historical factors, overlooked identity issues, overlooked diagnostic biases and clinical assumptions and errors. We're paying attention to the overlooked losses within Black communities, and we are especially shining light on overlooked strengths for people of color and especially those who identify as African American or other Black descendants. Now, these are the 5 areas that I talk about in my book: the overlooked historical, identity, clinical losses, and strengths. And I'll be talking about those 5 areas throughout the upcoming podcast episodes. And by the way, if you haven't purchased that book yet, the title is Overlooked: Counselor Insights for the Unspoken Issues. I want you to hear me. Counselor Insights for the unspoken, those things that go unnoticed or unrecognized or invalidated, those things that remain buried in Black history and particularly in oppression toward Black people. This book is available at Amazon.com, at Rowman and Littlefield Publishing, and everywhere that books are sold online. So, what are we talking about today? Today, I'm talking about diversity informed care and trauma informed practice. Now, I want to raise the question: is it possible, when you're working with Black, Indigenous, and people of color, to have a diversity informed practice without being prepared to provide trauma informed care. I say that it is not possible. It's probably not even ethical to try to call yourself having a diversity informed practice if you are not committed to trauma informed care. So let's talk about what trauma is and what trauma informed care is. Trauma is the result. Hear that. It's the result of an event or the result of a series of events or set of circumstances that's experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life threatening and has lasting adverse effects. Trauma is the result of an event. You have to hear that because that's not how we often hear the word trauma used. But trauma is the result of an event. Now, we often speak about um, people as having experienced a lot of trauma, as if they have experienced many events. When we speak of the events, we want to speak about the traumatic event, but we want to talk about trauma as something that's held in the body. Now, trauma informed care is an approach that seeks to engage people with histories of traumatic events. It attempts to recognize the presence of trauma symptoms in the body and attempts to acknowledge the role that traumatic events have played in a person's life. So we're separating traumatic events from the trauma itself. The trauma is held in the body. The events are again, the set of events or the set of circumstances or even a single event that produces a trauma response and trauma symptoms in the body. And trauma informed care is the approach to services that aims to engage people with histories of traumatic events and provide the appropriate context for care. Now, trauma informed care is not a treatment modality, it's not a particular theory about healing from trauma. It is the context, it is the ideology that we have around how trauma informed services and trauma treatment should be delivered. So let's ask this question. If we're going to talk about, again, diversity informed practice and trauma informed care, we've got to start with the basics. So, what happens to an individual when a traumatic event is experienced? What happens to the traumatized body, and why is trauma behavior misunderstood, especially amongst Black Americans? Well, we often describe people of color, especially African Americans and other Black Americans, as being highly reactive and flying off the handle easily. And we describe people who have histories of enslavement in their ancestry as sometimes not having a real strong ability to be self aware and to be introspective. We say all these things. What are we doing? We are suggesting that there's a deficit for Black people. And we do so, unfortunately, without the recognition of trauma histories and what really happens to the brain in trauma. With trauma, a person may experience neutral situations as threatening. Relates to the limbic system. The limbic system is the part of the brain involved in our behavioral and our emotional responses, especially when it comes to behaviors that we need for survival. Now, what happens to the brain in trauma is this system in the brain gets flooded with stress hormones. And as a result, it can stay stuck. The brain can stay stuck in fight, flight, or freeze mode. And that individual who has experienced these traumatic events and is now holding trauma in their body constantly feels on edge. Nothing seems to help. The emotional trauma gets physically stuck in your body and becomes your normal. Now, let me explain to you what those responses are where we get stuck. We have systems in our nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system, sometimes we call it the balance system, has what is essentially a gas pedal and a brake pedal. The gas pedal is the sympathetic nervous system, the brake pedal is the parasympathetic nervous system. Remember, gas pedal, brake pedal. The sympathetic nervous system, or the gas pedal, gives us a fight or flight response. It's responsible for protection and survival. Yes, it's a stress response. It's the stress response where the adrenal glands become activated. Now, the other system is like a brake pedal. It's the parasympathetic nervous system, and this is responsible for our rest, for digestion, for relaxation. It's what's activated for growth and for development in our bodies. Now, when you compare the trauma brain to the resting brain, the trauma brain is that sympathetic nervous system. Now, what happens when you're being chased by a lion? And here's how you can remember: if you're being chased by a lion, you want sympathy. You want sympathy. You want someone to feel bad for you. So, sympathetic nervous system is when you're being chased by a lion. And what happens? Your heart rate accelerates, your blood vessels constrict, your blood pressure increases, your muscles get tense, you have a more intense and amplified ability to experience physical sensations. We have the inhibition of insulin production to maximize fuel availability. This can all result in cold hands and feet or headaches, but the goal is to get the body in motion to fight or flee. When we're being chased by a lion, the goal is to survive. And that's what the trauma brain's goal is. This is when your sympathetic nervous system is dominant. It is prominent. It is the part of this nervous system that is activated and in motion. It's like hot, right? It's the gas pedal, the trauma brain. Now, the resting brain, that that parasympathetic nervous system, when that's dominant, you can eat again because it promotes digestion. Your you have fuel storage again. It increases insulin activity. Your resistance to infection increases again. So you are able to fight off colds and flus and things. Circulation to all the organs is increased, not just to those organs that are responsible for running or fighting. You get endorphins released, so you feel better. It brings down your heart rate, your blood pressure, brings down your body temperature, and you can rest and you can relax because there aren't any threats. There's no reason to be hypervigilant. There's no reason to be on high alert. There's no reason to feel threatened. You can rest when the parasympathetic nervous system is dominant. But when we think about the histories, the histories of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And I think about my ancestors because I am a descendant of enslaved people. I recognize that my ancestors' lives every day must have felt somewhat like they were being chased by lions. Well, guess what? They were being chased by dogs if they attempted to escape. I am aware that every day their hearts would have been racing. Every day their blood pressure would have been elevated. Every day they would have experienced muscle tension. Every day they were being subjected to traumatizing events and punishments. And every day their brains were in sympathetic nervous system dominance. Every day the gas pedal of survival mode was like floored, like, hitting it, right? Every day, their insulin production was affected to maximize fuel availability. And did they ever really have a time when they could go into resting brain and not fear for their lives or their safety or the safety of their loved ones, their children, their spouses, their parents? No, they never got to go into resting brain. So the trauma brain becomes the norm. Now, what's that have to do with me or with other people who may be, like I am, descendants of enslaved ancestors? Well, you have to know this, that each generation is prepared physiologically to survive the environment that the last generation had to survive. It's what's called an epigenetic response, where your DNA is not altered, but there's this note, like a post-it note, on the DNA. Although the DNA sequence doesn't change, your body is set in motion epigenetically to survive whatever dangers and environments your ancestors had to survive. So we often talk about the genetic predisposition for heart disease and high blood pressure and diabetes. And many, even medical professionals will act like they don't know why there's this genetic predisposition. But I know why this genetic predisposition exists. We have inherited a predisposition for surviving in high stress environments. And unfortunately, we still live in high stress environments. It's not the type of stress or environment, I should say, that my enslaved ancestors endured, but racism is still alive and well. So, in a sense, I do need to have my brain in survival mode quite often, perhaps even more often than I have a need for resting brain. So the trauma brain is always on high alert, very high alert. And with that comes startle responses, over what seems like overreactivity, but it's not really overreactivity. It's not overreactivity at all. In fact, trauma behavior, where a person is highly sensitive to danger, is normal and protective. Trauma behavior, where a person is easily startled, where a person is easily upset or angered, is the brain's response to what is a perceived and probably very real threat. The issue is that when you've been chased by a lion so many times, your brain becomes highly sensitive, and many things that are not lions will begin to look like a lion. So a squirrel looks like a lion, and you respond to an innocent thing like a squirrel as if it's a lion. And you go in to fight or flee in that moment. That part of the brain, that work of the brain, is through the anterior cingulate cortex. You don't have to remember that. You can just say ACC if you choose to. But here's what you need to remember is that this is part of the body's threat and stress response system, and it provides an environmental filter for the things that are relevant to you and those whom you love, such as safety. It's like a radar system because it sharpens your threat perception and makes your ability to sense something dangerous even stronger. It makes it more acute. And when that happens, you go into a highly reactive state of mind. It's so reactive that this part of the brain can access your entire physiology 8 or 9 times before you can get into that executive system that tells you to think about what you're going to do first. When you see a lion, if you were to see a lion charging at you, you wouldn't stand there and think about what to do. Your brain would tell you in a matter of milliseconds, 15 milliseconds, that you need to run. Now, the more frequently that part of the brain has to kick in for protection, the faster it becomes activated. Now, think about that. If you're an African American and you've been pulled over by the cops a couple of times, or the sound of sirens has filled your life, blue lights in the background, in the rear view mirror of your automobile begin to scare you and begin to make you feel uncomfortable. And the next thing you know, you're having the stress response. Or if you've been placed in situations where you felt unsafe too many times, guess what? That feeling of danger, that lack of safety, that feeling of being threatened will kick in, and your responses will be responses of fighting and anger. If you're a child in a classroom and you have been singled out multiple times for behaviors that were not punishable, or if you were assumed to be guilty of wrongdoing, or you were punished more severely or disciplined more severely or more harshly than classmates of other races, when the teacher says something to you, even if it seems benign to the teacher, you will hear that as yet another threat, as yet another injustice that's about to go down, and you react. And that's one of the reasons you have kids turning over chairs, I believe, and desks in classrooms, because when a teacher says something that feels like remotely like some injustice you've experienced before, or some danger or threat that you've experienced before, any form of trauma, you're going to go back into your trauma response of fight or flight. And sadly, African American children and African American adults get quickly labeled and blamed as having something wrong with them, as being disordered, as needing anger management, or being oppositional or defiant or conduct disordered. We label people when their brains are doing exactly what their brains are supposed to do. The brain is supposed to kick in and go into survival mode when there's a threat. We're just not supposed to be threatened every day. We're not supposed to feel like every day we are running from lions. And yet, and yet, that's how life feels for so many people dealing with racism and discrimination and environmental threats and chronic microaggressions. So people are acting exactly as their history has wired them to act, exactly as their history has wired them to perceive. Now, can we address this? Can we change this? Yes. But growth and change require intentional and sustained ability to have that parasympathetic system dominant. We need more spaces where people feel safe. We need more times when people feel safe for longer periods of time. We have to cool off the chaotic systems around them so they can cool off the internal system that responds to danger. What does that mean for our treatment? It means that behavior should never be the starting point of treatment except for times when there's immediate danger of death or injury. It means that we don't start with anger management because anger management tells the person they're doing something wrong and does not give them the opportunity to learn that the response that they seemingly can't control is normal and natural for protection. What I submit to you is that trauma informed care in the context of diversity informed practice means that we have structures, organizational structures, and treatment frameworks that involve understanding, recognizing, and responding to the effects of all types of trauma. Trauma informed care also emphasizes physical, psychological, and emotional safety, and it helps survivors rebuild a sense of control and empowerment. I submit to you that just as trauma damages trust, trauma informed care can indeed build trust. That means we have to practice the inclusion of empowerment, voice, and choice, prioritizing a person's choice and their control. It means we have to emphasize safety physically and emotionally. It means we have to take into consideration issues of culture and history and historical trauma. It means we have to be collaborative and work together on goals with those in our practice communities so that goals are not top down. And we have to encourage peer support so that people have a say in the services that they received, and they get peer support in terms of things like support groups and involvement in the skills and the services that they learn and receive. You see, the standard paradigm says what's wrong with this person, but a trauma informed paradigm of care asks what happened to this person. A standard paradigm asks the person, what's going on with you? What's wrong with you? But a trauma informed paradigm will ask, what is strong with you? What are your strengths? And a standard paradigm will not ask about historical factors, but a trauma informed paradigm will indeed ask about the traumatic events that have happened over time in your family, in your community, or in your life. In a standard view, we assume that a person who's coming into our practice community will trust us because obviously why they've come for us to for help. But no, a trauma informed view recognizes that trust develops over time, and we take steps to ensure safety, and we give that member of our practice community as much opportunity to express their own choice and feel empowered as much as we possibly can. So, what can you do? You can begin to incorporate those kinds of uh, behaviors and values in your practice. You can begin to think about highly reactive responses as behavior that makes sense in the context of client care for someone who has been traumatized. You begin to think about the impact of trauma and not just the sources of trauma. And you provide psychoeducation to help your your people, the people in your practice community. You help them understand that they're not crazy, that they their brains are doing exactly what their brains are wired to do, which is go into react mode because they have had so much trauma that the brain just wants to keep them safe. The brain is in survival mode. So we encourage people with activities that promote rest and promote calm digestion, that promote mindfulness. And we also advocate for systems to change so systems are less triggering. That's what it means to bring a diversity informed approach and intersect it with trauma informed care. That is all that we have for today. I hope that this has been informative for you. Listen, as always, I invite you to subscribe and like and turn on notifications if you have enjoyed this. If you work as a mental health professional, I hope this episode encourages you to look deeper into your practice. I hope it encourages you to challenge old assumptions and develop a truly inclusive approach to therapy. If you're not a counselor, I hope that you also will look deeper into your life and explore where you may be holding trauma from past traumatic events, and it just might be that those traumatic events have caused your brain to kind of get stuck in in survival mode, in safety mode. And I hope that if that's you, you will seek counseling to help you to uh, get out of that the constant trauma response mode, such that you're able to have your parasympathetic nervous system allow you to rest. Hope you can let up off of that gas pedal and experience what it is to slow down your trauma responses with your brain's brake pedal, so to speak. As always, again, leave a review and share this with others who might benefit. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is Laverne Haynes Collins. I am signing off, and until next time, let's keep practicing with empathy, humility, and a multicultural mindset. Hello, I'm Dr. Laverne Collins, and I want to invite you to be a part of something that is going to transform your practice. Here's the deal. For years, counselors have asked me if I provide consultation services on topics related to mental health and racial disparities and effectiveness in multicultural counseling. I've been providing trainings on these topics for the last 20 years, and I always get that request for consultation services. Well, I'm now offering a monthly consultation group on the topics that you bring to me. That's right. Every month, you can bring your racial diversity and counselor sensitivity questions to me, and I will share my insights. And this is available at a phenomenal group rate. Now, here's why you need this. We are living in a time where it is imperative that our helping presence is culturally responsive and culturally responsible in service to our practice communities. However, many counselors did not get very much education on really working effectively with Black, Indigenous, and people of color in graduate school. And many people have struggled to keep up with the current findings and the best practices for serving racially identified populations. So I've developed this monthly counseling group that meets on the first Friday of every month from 8:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And it's simply called Office Hours with Dr. Collins. And when you join this, I'm going to work with you in this consultation group to answer the questions that just come up in day-to-day practice, questions that come up for you and other providers, questions that you bring me about issues of race, faith, culture, and trauma. Now, this is a safe space where you can bring all the questions other folks don't talk about. You know what I'm talking about, the unaskable questions. For me, there is really no such thing as an unaskable question. And if you've participated in any of my webinars before, you know I go into great detail and deep content. So again, you can bring your own questions and learn from other people's questions. Your questions, my insight, and my 30 years of expertise on these topics. You'll have a full 90 minutes of my time every month for such a low price that you really cannot pass it up. So continue reading on this page. Get in on this now, too, because slots are limited and they'll go fast. And I'll see you during my office hours. Bye for now.